January 3rd, 2026. U.S. forces snatch Venezuela's president from the heart of Caracas in a dramatic mission dubbed Operation Absolute Resolve. President Nicolas Maduro, alongside First Lady Celia Flores, languishes in a New York jail, confronting explosive allegations of narco-terrorism. For years, he has been accused by President Trump of destabilizing the Americas by failing to stop drug trafficking and illegal immigration. So what triggered this aggressive U.S. intervention? Maduro ruled Venezuela with an iron grip for over 12 years, overseeing deep economic and social collapse while crushing dissent at home and defying pressure for political change.
There was a feeling it wouldn't last, he'd somehow get voted out, but actually he appeared sort of a lot more convinced that it was his destiny to remain in power. He sort of portrayed himself as the father of a nation. He sort of enjoyed dancing in front of the crowds. He even had his own radio show for a bit where he talked about his favorite salsa songs. He sort of seemed to have this self-impression that he was the beloved leader, but of course the polls and the elections told a very different story.
Maduro used the loyalist Supreme Court to strip the opposition-led National Assembly of power and created a parallel Constituent Assembly in 2017, consolidating his control and crushing democratic checks and balances. Armed pro-government militias, known as colectivos, were regularly deployed to violently intimidate protesters, suppress opposition, and enforce Maduro's rule locally.
They were given money, they were given guns, they were given transport in the form of motorcycles, often uniforms, radios. Latterly, I think it's fair to say that some of these groups have become effectively incorporated into the security forces. They're effectively pretty much employees of the state, but of course the usefulness of these civilian para-police groups is that they can carry out the sort of dirty work that the government needs to be done without it being attributed to the armed forces.
During Maduro's rule, Venezuela's economy suffered one of the most severe peacetime contractions in modern history, with GDP shrinking over 75% between 2013 and 2021 due to mismanagement, corruption, and collapsing oil production.
The Venezuelan government will blame it on sanctions, but it was actually the process that began even before those sanctions were imposed, when the United States was actually still the main buyer of Venezuelan oil.
As of 2025, 80 to 90% of Venezuelans lived in poverty, over half in extreme poverty and unable to afford basic food, amid ongoing shortages of essential goods and healthcare.
Sanctions tend to drive everything underground, so everything becomes the black economy. And of course, all this fosters corruption, which in turn has an impact on living standards of people.
The crisis triggered an unprecedented exodus, with over 7 million people fleeing the country.
That's 25% of the entire population. It's one of the biggest migrations that's ever happened anywhere in the world in terms of the proportion of the people leaving. To witness it was extraordinary. Provincial cities clearly half empty, buildings in Caracas with 10% occupation. This gap in the population, so you see very young people and very old people, but a whole bunch of people between the age of, say, 15 and 45 seem to have gone.
So what happened in Venezuela to warrant Trump's change of attitude towards foreign intervention? And are his stated reasons simply a cover for seizing control of the country's vast oil resources? The Trump administration has made clear that securing access to Venezuela's vast oil reserves was a key motivation for its military operation, tying U.S. involvement to plans to rebuild the country's broken energy infrastructure and unlock its crude oil for American benefit. Trump argues U.S. firms are owed billions from Venezuela's nationalized oil assets and can only recover it by reviving its collapsed oil sector.
The infrastructure is old, it's rotted. Much of it is stuff that we put there 25 years ago, and we're going to be replacing it, and we're going to take a lot of money out so that we can take care of the country.
But his interest in Venezuela isn't just about oil. It reflects a broader mix of economic opportunity, geopolitical competition, and national security strategy.
I think oil is a part of it. I think lots of people just want to say, oh, Donald Trump just wants money. I think it's a bit more complicated than that. And I think that it's as much about stopping the oil going to, and the money from the oil going to countries like China.
We're going to take back the oil that, frankly, we should have taken back a long time ago.
Money, yes, an aspect, but I think there's quite a bit going on.
Trump has made the drug trade a central pillar of his policy, targeting groups he claims drive the crisis and accusing Maduro of leading the so-called Cartel de los Soles, a broad term used to describe an alleged drug trafficking network embedded within Venezuela's governing and military structures.
The US accusation is that he leads this network. That is a convenient and rather, in many ways simplistic way of seeing it, but he was the president, he was running the country, and if there was this cartel that was embedded or had its sort of tentacles within some of the forces of the state, then, who was the boss? The boss was the president.
Was he involved in the drug trade? Probably not directly, but he did preside over a system, over a government, over a whole structure that facilitated contraband of all kinds, including drugs. Now, there was a massive level of impunity for people committing all sorts of crimes, provided that the government perceived that they were on the same side.
In the lead up to Maduro's arrest, U.S. forces struck over 30 vessels in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific, killing more than 110 people in operations justified as a war on drugs.
U.S. Southern Command posted this video of the attack on social media. It marks the 30th strike.
The White House releasing this dramatic video of the U.S. blowing up a boat in the Southern Caribbean.
We have a lot of drugs pouring into our country, coming in for a long time. Every one of those boats you see get shot down, you just saved 25,000 American lives.
Yet, claims that these strikes eliminated 95% of maritime trafficking are unsupported.
Little evidence they were actually directly heading towards the United States.
Essentially, the accusation leveled by the United States is that Maduro was personally engaged in sending large amounts of drugs to the United States in order to kill people, 25,000 per boatload, according to Trump's rhetoric, and obviously undermine, if you like, Western civilization, undermine the US government and attack the government politically, using what, again, in Trump's words, is a weapon of mass destruction, which is drugs.
Trump blamed Maduro for the migration crisis and repeatedly pushed the unsubstantiated claim that Venezuela was emptying its prisons to send criminals to the US border.
They've allowed millions of people to come into our country from their prisons, from gangs, from drug dealers, and from mental institutions.
A lot of that doesn't bear examination. There's no question there was a migration crisis, but the idea that Venezuela's kind of opened its prisons and sent them to the United States is not true. But that is one of the justifications.
The Trump administration used all of these reasons to roll out Operation Absolute Resolve.
The Maduro regime is not the legitimate government of Venezuela. It is a narco-terror cartel.
In the language Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, and others were using, they almost talked about Venezuela's problems as domestic problems for the US.
It became apparent that simply threatening Maduro from a distance was not going to work. He wasn't going to budge. And so that meant that they had a big dilemma. I mean, were they going to just sail away and give up?
Abandoning Venezuela meant defeat, especially for Marco Rubio. But intervening meant breaking Trump's promise to avoid foreign wars.
So Rubio sold it, I think, to Trump on the basis that, number one, there's no need to get involved in a war. Number two, it's going to have a great impact on immigration, which is one of your prime objectives. So they came up with this rather ingenious solution. Something that I think only the US military could do: snatch Maduro and leave, change the government without changing the government. I mean, it's a very innovative and probably unprecedented kind of operation.
And when Trump announced that US forces had captured Nicolas Maduro in a dramatic overnight strike, the White House was openly self-congratulatory.
What all of us witnessed last night was sheer guts and grit, gallantry and glory of the American warrior. No other country on planet Earth, and it's not even close, could pull this kind of operation off.
When it comes to how they wanted to paint the operation, which is one where they were taking down a bad guy, it felt a little bit as though, this is how you would expect it to almost look in the Hollywood depiction of the thing that happened.
Social media page run by the White House posted this video you can see here. It shows Mr. Maduro entering the Drug Enforcement Administration headquarters in New York.
But the deeper question remains. If Maduro's party still holds power, will his removal change anything? Despite Maduro's departure, the existing power structure remains largely intact. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez was sworn in as interim president on January 5th.
US President Donald Trump has warned Rodriguez that she'll pay what he called a very big price if she fails to cooperate with his administration.
The blueprint was in place for some sort of big government change. What few expected was what actually happened, was that you remove the president, but the vice president continues.
What is the most stable way to bring about the end of Maduro and get American interest when it comes to oil? It's really just keeping the status quo but exerting influence for now. Now, it might not work in the long term, and I think the administration are also not saying it should work in the long term.
Venezuelans greeted the events with caution and wariness.
You've got to be careful. It's the same government that's got an authoritarian government, and celebrating a military operation by another country to remove the president is not something many people feel comfortable doing, certainly in public.
Rodriguez initially condemned the US operation as aggression, but quickly shifted tone, inviting the US government to work with her on a cooperation agenda.
I'm loving Venezuela. They've been working with us so well. It's been so nice.
Opposition, which, bear in mind, has been out of power for 26 years, did not have the sway or the influence over the people that matter. That's not the population at large, but it's the army, the militias, these colectivos, all of these groups that have the gun.
She doesn't have the support within, or the respect within the country.
Trump has insisted the US will run Venezuela and signed executive orders to protect US-held proceeds from Venezuelan oil sales.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition.
They appear to be working hand in hand on an economic stabilization. The Chavista president, Delcy Rodriguez, smiling and making deals with the imperialist ogre. It's bizarre. People are finding it hard to adapt to.
Arguably, they don't have any choice, but it has been extraordinary to witness this change actually sort of unfolding in front of us.
The US has made restarting Venezuela's oil industry conditional on Caracas cutting ties with key partners like China, Russia, Iran, and Cuba, and aligning its energy sector exclusively with American interests. A demand critics argue amounts to forcing a geopolitical realignment under threat of continued blockades and sanctions.
So you don't have to be totally with us, but you can't really be against us, and you can't be too supportive, or too much sort of in the pocket of our major global adversaries.
It is unclear whether this strategy will ultimately work, especially as meaningful oil recovery would likely take years of significant investment. So what has Operation Absolute Resolve actually resolved so far? The stunning capture of Nicolas Maduro in the first days of the new year may signal a more emboldened imperialist phase of the second Trump presidency.
Certainly sent shockwaves through the region on many levels. The United States can and is prepared to exert its power in pretty sort of spectacular ways as and when it wishes to do so.
America's own backyard, they think they need to govern it. They need to keep a closer eye on it.
I think any leader in this region who wants to take an anti-American stance will be sleeping a little less comfortably in the future weeks and months and possibly years. It's a clear message. What we're seeing really, possibly, is this division of the world in the Americas, that Trump has, to a certain extent, a free hand to do what he wants to do. And the question is, what is the quid pro quo?
Meanwhile, Maduro faces a legal ordeal that could last for more than 2 years.
There hasn't been a lot of evidence, and that's partly to do with the nature of the charges, that when you're indicted, the evidence is not made public. And it's quite possible, in fact, that much of this evidence will be heard behind closed doors. So, of course, there are people who are going to say there's no way that someone who the United States has been publicly accusing of being a narco-terrorist for months can possibly get a fair trial. The prosecution will have a different view of that, but it is a highly charged case, that's for sure.
Stabilizing Venezuela won't be easy, but the removal of Nicolas Maduro might signal that the world is returning to a sphere of influence system, with Russia, China, and the United States dividing control over their respective regions.